I came to Hill House to find the key to another world. Assisting me in this exploration of the unknown was Eleanor, Nell, who could look back into the past, and Theo, something of a witch, who could see into the future. This is Luke, who didn't believe in anything, until evil, patient and waiting, made him change his mind.
Hello, listening people.
Hello.
Ooh, Bartek. How are you?
Who is there? Who's there? Who's there?
Who could it be?
Who's there?
Ooh, I'm lost, Bartek. Lost in this podcast. Help me.
I'm Bartek.
You fuck. You fuck. I love it. Oh, Bartek, it's me, Ryan, your fellow host.
You are Ryan. I knew that, actually.
Yes, that's my full name. You are Ryan. That is the name that I am bestowed.
Ulrich Richard Ryan.
That's it. That's it. No Polish enough in there. No Polish. I'm sorry. We used to be spitting Polish likely because we were both spitting and we both happened to be Polish. But now you're the only Pole in the room today and you just have me, the disembodied ghost Ryan. Ooh, I'm haunting you with movie recommendations. Ooh.
Ah, fuck, not again.
Not again.
This happens every 3 weeks.
This happens every 3 weeks. We're here for Spooky Month. October is the time in which we look over movies of a much more creepy, spooky, horror, thriller, chiller, killer feel. And we go over them on our show Pictures Powwow, where, one of us recommends a movie, whether that be myself or you, Bartek, or you, the listening people at home. You get to recommend a movie, and your movie recommendation is the next one up. So you better listen in. You better listen in to what the movie is at the end of the episode. So you have to listen to the whole episode. I'm so sorry. Unless you haven't seen the film of discussion, and I always say, you should watch the film for yourself, get your own opinion, get your own experience, then come back and hear what we have to say.
And do not read the description.
Mm-hmm. Do not read the description.
Because the second paragraph tells you what the next film is.
Yeah, but you don't get to hear me say it. And that's the difference.
Yep. And do not Google what timelines are.
Yeah. Do not do that either. So we are here today to talk about a movie that I recommended, a film that I have not seen before, but I've been keen on giving it a watch. I got the date wrong last time. I thought this was a late 1950s movie, not an early 1960s movie, so that was my mistake. We're talking about 1963's The Haunting, not to get confused with the 1999 film or the television series The Haunting of Hill House, which I'll have stuff to say about all of those in a little bit. But
have you seen all those?
I will have stuff to say about those in a little bit. But I recommended this because this has been one of those specters hanging around where I just have not consumed it. I like The Innocents, which is a very similar film of a very similar era of time, where it is woman in a house that's old, possibly possessed and creepy, and is it real? Are they insane? Is it haunted? That type of deal. And The Haunting is always one of those references. Oh, if you like that gothic horror feel, and is it real or is it insanity? You got to check this one out. So I recommended it for that reason. So that is in part my history. I'm also familiar a bit with the filmmaker, Robert Wise. He directed Star Trek: The Motion Picture. And the Andromeda Strain. So he's done some science fiction. This is his horror. He's also done musicals, which is very good to know because he's a filmmaker that likes to use the sets. He likes to have space. He likes to have geography very much present in the locations that we are sitting in with our characters, which I do think is very applicable to The Haunting as well.
Yes, for sure.
So that is my history. What about you, Bartek? Any familiarity with The Haunting?
No, not really. I've obviously heard of it before, but didn't know much about it. At the end of last week's episode, you mentioned that, about a decade ago, the Nostalgia Critic released a review of the 1999 version, which I had vague memories of. Basically, a couple of people are in a house and that house has some creepy stuff going on. So that's kind of the expectations I walked into this film with.
I confirmed it is their favorite horror film. Nostalgia Critic The Haunting is their favorite horror film and one of their favorite films. So I just want to confirm that. Last time I said, I'm pretty sure it's one of their favorite films. And you're like, oh, really? And I'm like, yeah. So that's why you really hated the remake a lot.
That explains it.
But so you really not familiar with this one, though? This film at all?
No, I wasn't familiar with it.
Okay, so what did you expect coming in to this? What did you think that you were going to have happen when you sat down to put on the 1963's The Haunting?
I didn't necessarily think about it before I started watching the film. But as I was watching it, I was unintentionally comparing it to The Shining in some ways, where that was a film about, a group of people, only 3 of them, staying in a not abandoned hotel, but a hotel that just has the 3 of them in it.
With a history.
With a history, and ghosts, were inhabiting it, and they were inhabiting the hotel, ghosts were in there, they have a history with that hotel, and they were influencing one of the people staying with them, Jack Nicholson. I wasn't necessarily thinking that this film was going to have, one of the main characters be possessed and turn evil or anything like that. But basically that, some spooky stuff was going to be happening to them, and, it would be very obviously supernatural.
Yes, I was also very of a similar vein. I thought this was going to be your ghost house movie, where they are in an old mansion, an old thing, and has a lived-in history, and there are ghosts and goblins and ghouls, and you're going to have those scary moments, and it was going to either be actual ghosts shown, or it was going to be some elaborate scheme, because that's a lot of these movies too, whether it's real or the Scooby-Doo thing where it's like a real person and they're fucking with them. Or maybe I was also expecting a bit of that old kind of campfire story type deal where you have the hook hand on the back of the car, that type of feel, but in a ghost house setting, where you perhaps have maybe it is these people were doing a spooky thing, but then actually real spooky things are happening. That was the general vibe. I really admire, if we go into what we think of it now, I really did admire the fact there are no supernatural beings shown on the screen. There are no special effects ghosts that wibble and wobble at you. It is a lot of implications. It's lots of things that happen that are hard to explain in a way that isn't supernatural, but then you could argue as well, because we have unreliable characters that we're following. And overall, I really admired the restraint and how it focused a lot more on the psychological and a lot more on the tension of these strangers being together, rather than jump scare, ghost special effects, ghosty things. Even though, strangely enough, in real life, I'm really not into ghosts or that supernatural stuff, especially. But when it comes to movies, I'm a real big fan of these ghost films. I'm a fan of ghost movies. I'm a real big fan of witch movies, as you know, having done the podcast. But in real life, I don't give a fuck about witches. I don't care about their aesthetic, their history, the Wiccans, and none of that really matters to me. But put a film on involving all of that, and I'm intrigued for some reason. There's just a certain allure about these things when put in a story that drags me in. Just to that point, are there things like that for you at all, where there are certain things, say, in real life you're not at all interested in, but you are drawn to it in a fictional context, whether it be a movie, a game, a show, a book, anything like that for you?
This wouldn't be one that I would, say in a natural conversation outside of this podcast, but you have pointed out that even though in real life it is something that I avoid like the plague, I seem to really enjoy films about sport teams. And it's very odd. Like, when you pointed it out, I realized, that is kind of true. The kind of conventions of those films do have this kind of appeal to me for some reason.
The friendship, the camaraderie, the feeling of a team. And Yeah, that's actually a good one. Even I forgot about that because it's been a while since you've recommended a sports film, it feels like. When was the last one? I'd have to recollect. I'm sure someone I can look and be like, it's actually this one. It was like 3 episodes ago. Don't you remember when Bartek recommended this?
Cube.
That's my favorite sports movie. Right up there with Stoker. So, overall, what did you think of The Haunting?
I have quite mixed feelings, and when I, thought about them some more and put words to them, I thought about some other previous films that we had done where I basically kind of had the opposite issues.
Oh.
And so I almost kind of feel like a child who doesn't know what he wants, in a way.
So I'm actually very stunned to hear this because I was watching this and I was absolutely enamored with this, loving this, and I was sitting there going, "Oh, I don't think this is too outside of the realm for Bartek." I was actually going to be like, "Oh, I expect Bartek to kind of come in and maybe be like, yeah, I thought it was."
I have warm feelings towards it, but there were just a few things that were kind of bothering me throughout it. That, again, because of some previous episodes, I was like, "Oh man,
this is going to be a tough thing to please." Can we point out? Did you notice who one of the actors was?
I recognize the name in the credits, yeah. Russ Tamblyn?
Yes, who is?
He was Dr. Jacoby in Twin Peaks.
And of course, he in this is the young, handsome Luke.
Yeah, I saw his name, I'm like, oh, well, I'm sure I'll recognize him. Then, like, halfway through the film, I was like, oh, wait, this is, like, 30-something years prior. I probably will not point out who he is by the end.
But he's Luke. He's the handsome young man. He was in West Side Story. Come on, again, which is by the same director, I'm pretty sure.
If we ignore the fact that he was in deleted scenes of Fire Walk with Me, I think this might be the first movie I've seen with him in it.
Yeah, I would say that we've done on the podcast. Yes,
yeah, because
he was in Django Unchained. But
then that will be it then.
Yeah, he's been in. Yeah, and I'm sure
because the two main things that I know him from are Twin Peaks, and he was in that one episode of Babylon 5.
Yeah, so you've never seen West Side Story?
No, I haven't.
Well, we might have to change that one of these days. I also want to point out that
there are people feelings to musicals.
There are people screaming. Yes, Robert Wise also did The Sound of Music, one of the great movie musicals. I know you're screaming that.
I think I've seen that one.
So
there's a captain at the din table, right?
Yeah. Russ Tamblyn is great in this. I just want to shout that out. We are used to him as being strange, avant-garde, weird characters. Here, I actually like that he was the young, fresh-faced cynic and pessimist, if we want to go there. And I really delighted in that. I thought he was magnificent here. He was funny in a way that didn't, for my taste, intrude upon the drama.
Yeah.
His style of comedy didn't feel dated either. His comedy felt like a person who would be in this reacting rather than 60s comedy being thrown in to alleviate the tension a little bit.
If we look at the other three main guys the three leads as being like the sort of elevated fictional story characters, he felt very much more like normal.
Mm-hmm.
As you said, cynical, normal, trying to see everything rationally.
Yeah, he has no investment in the supernatural. Well, everyone else has some investment in it.
Yeah,
the Doctor does, our main character does, as does Theo.
The dialogue, the way the film's shot, just all these things about it like makes it seem really mystical and deep and things like that. And for him, it's just very normal throughout. Like when he mentioned, like, I'm going to turn this room into a nightclub. Like the concept of a nightclub was the furthest thing from my mind. But yeah, the fact that he said it like made sense.
Yeah, and he's a young party guy, and he just wants to profit.
Yeah.
Which I understand, man. I see it. You have this big mansion, you want to profit off it. And then by the end, he has an arc.
Yeah, and even before we meet him, when like, they mention what kind of character this is, it felt like very much like that character was fulfilled. Mm-hmm. The promise was fulfilled of what this character was going to be.
He has the last line in the movie that is a narration. It ends with a narration from Eleanor, but I think he has the last line before where he says, like, we need to burn this place down and salt the earth. And he looks at the mansion, and then it fades into that, and then we get the narration.
We need to shove ourselves out of this shit.
And he had an arc. He started out as a cynic, and by the end, he's the one that is the most ruthlessly against the supernatural, demonic, evil presence, aura of the Hill House. He is very much against it, which, there you go. At the beginning, he was just indifferent and thought of it as a cash cow and a burden. He's like, oh, this is going to inherit to me. I've got to do something about it. To now being like, this is a darkness in his life, which is awesome. So overall, I had a really brilliant experience with this. I felt genuine tension and terror and suspense throughout this.
Mm-hmm.
Most people would reference this. I mean, I looked at the IMDb trivia and it is there as like the iconic scene, but the bending door, the door that was breathing in and out, was magnificently done. I thought the sound design to that was well done. The shot composition was magnificent. You had brilliant close-ups and angles to that where it really was this imposing thing, and you just had the characters' reactions to it where they're almost stuck in absolute fear of it and terror, and they're frozen, and it just adds this otherworldliness to it all. And that's the film, The Haunting. To me, the use of black and white is effective. I cannot imagine this not in black and white. It's one of those where it would be almost sacrilegious to make this in color, which is what happened later in the 90s, and they did it with CG and crap. But I was in the certain films, especially horror films, say, or films of this kind of spooky variety, have a vibe.
Mm-hmm.
Like John Carpenter's a very beloved filmmaker because he has a vibe, as does David Cronenberg, as does Lynch, where they have a vibe to their movies, an overall mood and sensation you get when you watch them. And that's what I got from this, a really well-defined, really clear vibe of gothic horror and the sense of people trapped in a location going mad. Talking about John Carpenter, that's the thing. The thing is a bunch of men stuck in this inhospitable location, slowly going crazy while there's an alien threat. Here, it's these people stuck in this mansion, slowly going crazy while there's a possible supernatural threat. And I really enjoyed that. It was a film where I liked the characters a lot as well, and I'm sure we'll talk about them. But for me, the character itself was that tone and that overall mood that was transmitted to me from my television screen to my eyes and into my heart. It is one that lingered with me. I watched this at like 11 o'clock at night with all the lights off because I had come back from an event and I was like, oh, I'm going to watch The Haunting. And it was just one of those where it starts out slow, but before you know it, it is ratcheting up the tension. There comes a point where it clicks into gear and you're like, you're off to the races now. But that is just how I fared with this. I want to hear, what is this strange relationship you have had with The Haunting?
So, good branch off point there. You mentioned the start was slow.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually really, really hooked in from the start. Like the beginning narration bit where you're learning about the history of the house. You've got this narrator with a clear voice, like telling you basically this little horror story.
Beautiful shots happening.
The
woman falling down the stairs was a particular favorite of mine.
Yeah. You're learning little bits about who these characters are, but not too much to the point where they feel fleshed out, so it feels like a horror story that you're being told. And it's got this really spooky vibe. Like, I was really enjoying the vibe of that part. You're learning who the family are. There's this girl, and you feel like, oh, is this girl going to be important? And you very quickly go through her life story. Mm-hmm. She ends up not being a factor. There was a sort of like negligence thing, very similar to Friday the 13th, actually, that we had last week.
And very similar to our main character's own story.
Yep, for sure. And it really kind of set up this idea of like, okay, there's going to be, this horror movie where there's going to be, ghosts or spirits kind of, doing things, and that's where the horror's going to be coming in. And what I was mainly thinking about with The Shining, which we reviewed almost 3 years ago exactly, I think it was like early November 3 years ago. In that film, I was hoping that one would be a bit more of a, not supernatural, just psychological stuff going on. And I was a bit let down by the fact that, it kind of turned to ghosts. It was still a great film,
Magnificent.
But yeah, really great. But I was, kind of hoping for a bit more of the psychological. And in this one, it kind of seemed to be playing in the opposite, where it was very psychological, and the acting, the characters, they were brilliant, very empathetic towards them. But I was kind of hoping for a little bit more of, some supernatural elements being a bit more obvious. Not to, I know that in the original script there were some very implicit things or explicit things, and they wanted to be a bit more subtle. But I was hoping for a little bit more of a, I guess, traditional horror-y kind of story.
Right. Wow. Yeah, you're right. You are a child who cannot be pleased. Because I wasn't expecting that to be your thing, of you wanted there to be more of an overt ghostly presence. Because for my money, I think there is. I think there's enough here where you would make the argument that it's the events of a supernatural entity or entities haunting this place and gaining the evil. But there's also enough of the psychological and the people going mad. I found that balance to be I found that balance to be well done.
I'm also really struggling to get rid of the whole death of the author thing, because when I was reading the trivia and about how there was going to be the twist that it's a mental institution all along, I was like, oh, that's kind of the vibe that I was getting from it, and I kind of wish that I didn't know that part.
Yeah, I understand that. I didn't factor that stuff in either. I read the stuff afterwards. I'm like, okay, yeah, cool. And there's a book. This is based on a book, of course, called The Haunting of Hill House, and they had to just call it The Haunting because it's too long of a title, which is very amusing to think about when only a couple of years later Dr. Strangelove would come out. But just to touch that briefly, there's The Haunting of Hill House book, The Haunting in 1963, The Haunting in 1999 with Catherine Zeta-Jones as the Theo character, and the Netflix series The Haunting of Hill House. Those are the four that I'm aware of this Haunting of Hill House adaptation franchise. Now, I imagine there's probably some others in amongst there, and also ones that were probably inspired by the book or even the film and have riffed on it, but I'm just going to those. I have not seen any of those until now. I have not engaged with any of them until now. This is the one I've engaged with, The Haunting. I've been meaning to check out the book. I've been meaning to check out the Netflix series I've heard good word of mouth about, but I've just done that thing where I went, oh, that sounds cool. I'll get around to it. Or, oh, yeah, sure. And then just never done it.
Mm-hmm.
But here I am with the very acclaimed film, and yeah, I didn't realize that there wasn't going to be as an overt ghostly presence, because from what I do know about the Haunting of Hill House television series and the 1999 remake, there are ghosts. They are there. They are running around, and there's CG effects and jump scares and going ooh at you, and creepy stuff in the background, and you blink and you miss it. Oh, was that an entity? And so I did know those things from those remakes. So I was thinking, oh, well, that'll be in this. There'll be elements of that. And I appreciated that there weren't.
It was a pleasant surprise.
It was a pleasant surprise, and I didn't miss that. I very much went in that opposite direction to where you are, I guess, where I'm just like, no, this is what I need, more of this psychological, more of this.
And again, I know that last week I mentioned that that's kind of what I look more forward to, but I guess since we were doing Spooky Month, I was kind of expecting the opposite.
Did you not think this was spooky?
Again, when I said before the characters are great and I was very empathetic towards them, that was the main feeling that I was getting, almost like psychological drama. But I do agree with what you said a little bit earlier than that about how there were very suspenseful scenes, like when they're freaking out and like they're hugging each other, all of the stuff with the spiral staircase, there's a lot of tension there.
All the sounds in the house.
Yeah, so I guess thrillery drama is more what I saw here than like spooky horror.
Really? What about the door? The door, the big wooden door that was breathing in and out, and the door jiggling, like, that's spooky.
It was suspenseful, but yeah.
But like, how do you justify that as a non-spooky, supernaturally thing? Like, that's the big bit in the movie where like, well, that's very supernaturally, like, that is beyond.
Well, obviously, I'm not saying that there is no supernatural stuff here going on, because there is the whole sort of mystery about, like, is there, isn't there? Is there actually, like, ghosts doing these things? Is it just in their heads, or is it just, like, the wind?
Yeah, well, and then they keep saying, well, there is no drafts in here. The house is actually pretty tightly wound up like that. And it's like, well, what is this then? This cold spot. It's stale air.
This is another one that definitely a second viewing would help for me, yeah.
Yeah, you've got me. I'm just like, wow, I found this a very spooky movie. It is like the embodiment of spooky to me, without actually having the ghosts show up physically. Just the overall presentation of it, the music, the outfits, those character archetypes, the people sniping at one another and trying to understand if it's their conflicting personalities and their own personal baggage, or if it is the influence of this house, this evil house. And I don't know, there was just the poetry to it all, of history repeating itself, and literal history, like there's these statues in the house that are of historical figures, and you
see like faces in the walls and things like that.
Man, this was just, for me, it was a rip-roaring good time. Let's go to those characters, because for me and for many and for you as well, the characters are really what are driving this as well, because you have the general presentation and that overall mood and aesthetic, but that means nothing. Well, it depends. It means nothing for the most part if you don't have good characters or well-defined.
This would be a different film if the cast from Friday the 13th were in the house.
It would be. So we have, let's go with the Doctor first, because he's, I guess, the least, or well, like the lesser figure out of our four. He's noble Doctor man who seems to believe in the supernatural. He wants evidence for it, and that weighs in on how much of this is real or not, because he's the most level-headed. He's the most like unshaken by these things, but he personally wants it to be the supernatural. So that, as an audience member, as a viewer, gets you thinking about where you fall or where you are supposed to fall when it comes to, is this real or not? Because he's the most level-headed one. He's not being arrogant like Luke. He's not being pig-headed, but he has an agenda behind what he believes. And so when creepy things do happen, he is naturally more inclined to look at it from the supernatural lens. But then he also flicks being like, well, it could be this normal thing, though. But the way the actor does it, I really like this actor's performance, where when he does give the rationalizations, it feels very logical, very determined, but also empty. Where it's like, that he's saying it because it has to be said, but I don't think he believes it. What about you? What did you think of Doctor?
I liked him. He was, very kind of gentlemanly, very pleasant. He's the one that kind of invited everyone. He gave the call to adventure for everyone. He tries to take the lead in everything, and he's the one taking it. No, I was going to say he was the one taking it the most seriously the whole way through, but he's the one that's trying to keep everything a bit more organized. Because I mean, I think our actual lead, Eleanor, Nell, she was taking it pretty seriously. I think.
She was convinced that it was beyond our earthly realm type of deal. When he's taking it seriously in the fact that you got to look at this analytically, or you got to look at it like this, but he clearly wants it to be supernatural.
Yeah, there's an interesting level of comfort when he is on screen, but then, he's also reacting to all the things going on. Like, we had that scene where the two girls were in the room freaking out because of all the knocking and shaking, and then when they finally opened the door, he and the other guy were just walking by. I was like, hey, what's going on? We were dealing with, like, a dog or something going on? And it's just this really weird thing of, like, not only a dissonance, but also they didn't hear any of the things that we, the audience, were experiencing alongside these very stressed out women. So it's this weird thing of like, you're comforting me a little bit with your attitude, but the fact that you are not on the same level is kind of disconcerting.
The writing and the performances really gelled well when it came to an implication or a subtext for the characters. With the Doctor, we don't know too much about him as a person. We know him as his job. A lot of the time, we're looking at him from his job and why he's here and his role in it and as an academic. But when his wife comes into the picture, that's not a large portion of the film, but the writing and the acting gives us a lot of implied history and gives us a new understanding of this man.
Oh, yeah.
But in realness, it's not a lot in the script or in the screen time, but little goes a long way. And so when she comes in, we see him turn slightly to a different tact of his being and far more personal now. He's been the level-headed one, or he's been the more removed one, and he's not been as like emotional. He's had his emotional points, like he's been startled, but when his wife comes into the picture, now he's in full husband mode.
Yeah, there's this new sense of like dissonance where it's like, oh, woman, you don't get it. This guy knows what he's talking about. You don't know what you're talking about. But then there's another thing of like, this woman probably knows this man better than anyone else. So am I still trusting him the same way that I was throughout the film? It's interesting.
The wife character was really, really awesome as well. I liked her attitude about how she doesn't believe in any of this stuff, but also like, if it happens, then great, awesome, we can get this done with. She's just very much like, we've got to go. Like, we've got to have this. And then she disappears from the film and she has her own little adventure, apparently. And even that reads as how you mentioned the incident where the two female leads are shaken by all the noises, and then the two men open the door and they're just casually like, hey, what's going on? And there's that element of like, are they lying? How did they not experience this? I got that with the wife at the very end, the way she came out and her story and like things that weren't adding up with her. I got a similar vibe of like, are you bullshitting us? Like, are you real? And if it is, what happened to you? But we don't get to really see it. We never saw what happened to her from her perspective. We get to hear about, like, the house deliberately was, like, misleading me and fucking with me. It's like, yeah, was it? Or was it that you just got up in the middle of the night and got lost? And then you kept getting lost and you got lost and lost and lost. Like, we don't know. There's this sense of, when she comes in too, we're so in the main character's shoes, in Nell's shoes, we don't trust the wife. There's elements throughout all of this where it's like, maybe this is her playing a practical joke. Maybe she's gone away now. Maybe somebody's killed her, perhaps. Who knows? There's just this element of mistrust and fear of this wife character. So that when she does jump out at the end and perhaps makes our lead character swerve the car and die, there's an element of like, where do we land as a viewer about that? Like, do we believe that story about how, no, she was already on her way to hit that tree and she saw me last second? Like, the wife character, although a small cog in this story, really added a lot.
Yeah, very, very, it's reminding me of Burning too, like the end where we're like questioning back on certain things. The main thing that I'm kind of thinking with her though is, you know, the stretch of like she ended up somehow at the top in like the attic or something, which seems like a little bit of a stretch to say like she got lost and then somehow ending up all the way out near the gate. So I am still leaning more towards like supernatural things were going on for sure. And also because it leads into the whole poetry of like every 90 years, you know, someone dies at the tree.
Yeah, that is that rhyming scheme, as George Lucas wants us to remember. It's poetry. It rhymes.
It rhymes, yeah.
But also we got a very minor element where it does come across her character would just do this to fuck with people. Like, because she doesn't take it seriously. But we don't know enough.
Yeah.
That's an element where this isn't a criticism. This is a negative criticism. This is a positive. She's underdeveloped in a way that is beneficial.
Oh, yeah. For this type of film, you want that intentional, thoughtful underdevelopment.
When she arrives, the Doctor becomes very male, masculine. He has to go up those stairs to go get Nell and protect her and bring her back because she's this poor innocent woman, almost like a child that needs to be looked after. From that point on, he's very much grabbing her and protecting her and telling her what she needs to do now, while before he was treating her like an intellectual equal. But then when his wife came along, that changes and the movie changes, and it really colors his character differently about what persona he puts on in front of who.
Yeah.
Because Eleanor is clearly in love with him, but then the wife comes along and that fucks things up. You can see her snap. You can see her be like, no, I like him though. I have a thing for him at least. And and then he turns all husband mode, and comes across almost in moments antagonistic for Eleanor to see that side of him where he has to grab her and bring her down the stairs, and it almost feels like a cat and mouse chase when they're going up the spiral staircase where she's like looking down at him and he's looking up and he's just like, don't you keep following me? It's like, don't you keep going up then? It's very amusing. I like that performance. Very dignified. Very dignified. We already went over Russ Tamblyn a bit, but tell me a bit more about your overall experience with this character, because he doesn't immediately enter the film either. He takes a little while to.
He's the last one of the four that we're introduced to. Yeah. I think of the four, he was the most understated presence, because obviously we're following Eleanor the most. Her relationship with Theo is one of the major focuses of the film. And the Doctor is the one kind of keeping everything together. So, like you said before, he brings this sort of comedic element without undermining the whole tone.
He can be an audience point of view character as well.
Audience point of view character for sure. Like I mentioned before with the whole like getting on the stairs nightclub thing, he is bringing this different level of, language, performance, psychology forth to show, this isn't just like, this creepy supernatural horror film. These are real people that are experiencing this thing.
And since he looks at this as real things, his character a surprising amount sets up things, because he physically interacts with the house. So the stairwell, he gets up on it and he shakes it about, and we see things get set up, and he does that a lot throughout the film. He just he has these little moments where, because he's physically touching things, so he doesn't look at it like they do as like a installation or a piece of history or perhaps an article of the supernatural. He's like, I don't give a fuck. I'm gonna drink my booze, and then all that kind of thing. So there are moments in the film where he sets up little things like that big breathing door. He's the one that closes it and fucks around with it, and we get a lot of that because he's the more understated character. He's more comedic relief, but he's also horny. Is it not too overtly? Like I wouldn't say he's a sleaze, but there is an air of lust to him. Like he very much enjoys hanging out with two very attractive ladies in a house alone. You can tell that from Russ Tamblyn's performance.
When he went on the stairs, he was literally describing like, I'm going to have a bunch of women on these stairs and doing the can.
And for me, and I'm curious to hear your point of view on this as well, that lust aspect, that sexuality that he brings is actually very important to the movie, because I think there's very much a strong sexual component to The Haunting. I think there's an undercurrent of sexuality and sexual attraction happening in this story. How do you feel about that?
Definitely there is this kind of deeper connection between the two female leads, where a lot of their performance together involves a lot of intimacy to, calm each other down, which you can read into as being the level of attraction between the two.
Or the one.
Or the one, yes. And there's the contrast with that, where you have these moments where Theo is, very affectionate, touchy. She even does little intelligent things or psychological things, like, saying something mean to Eleanor to distract her from the fear, make her feel anger instead of fear. But then you have these moments where her mood shifts and she is a bit more genuinely antagonistic in the way she talks. So yeah, it does bring this interesting, I guess, sexual tension in a way.
Because I look at it as like love square, I guess, or like sexual square, because there's a four. You have Russ Tamblyn, you have Luke, and he's just being a general sleaze. But again, I want to emphasize this isn't overtly cartoonish. She's not like using pickup lines or touching them. But Russ Tamblyn's performance has just that waft of it. And you have scenes where he's trying to get with, he's interacting with Theo, and the actress there does a marvelous job as well of really showing us that she does not like men. Like the way she interacts with Luke throughout this movie, every time he gets a little close, she just is like, no. And that is, again, subtlety. It isn't like this overt thing there. That is, me and many people pick this up when looking at the film, and it's something that the actors were all working on as well when you read the behind the scenes of this. And then I read that Theo has an attraction towards Nell. I that is my read of it too, and Nell does not, because Nell is attracted to the Doctor, and the Doctor can't be even thinking about that because he's got a wife. I'm going to go find her. And so you have a group of people who are stuck in a house who, because of their attractions and their interests, they will never be able to connect.
It's a love line more than a triangle. Yeah.
It's people who will be unable to connect because they're attracted to the other thing, or they're rejecting of the other thing. That's why I also look at Theo's behavior throughout the movie, where she gets very snippy and antagonistic at Nell because Nell is kind of fucking around with her as well. Let's go to Theo character. What do you think of her? She's very mysterious. She's got a lot of, without the text saying anything, that this is a character with a history.
Yes.
Just that performance, the way she looks, her clothing, the way she carries herself, the way the others react to her. This is a character where they've lived a life, but we are not privy to that. What do you think of her?
She definitely speaks in a way that she's, had a history. I've already mentioned, she's got like the two moods. Like you never know quite what moods you will see in any given scene because it seems to go back and forth. There is obviously the possibility, the very strong possibility that she has romantic or sexual feelings towards Eleanor, being possibly lesbian. That was definitely a possibility in my mind. I was more focusing on, I guess, from Eleanor's perspective, the whole idea of how women typically are a bit more intimate with each other than men are with each other. So in this kind of, scary environment where the fear of the unknown is at play, and also the fact that Eleanor has brought on so much psychological baggage that she's constantly narrating to herself,
and they're all strangers.
They're strangers. They don't know what's going on. Me as an audience member who was empathizing with Eleanor, I was always cheering for the moments of like, well, yeah, get together, make each other feel better. It's not as scary when you're together. So when you have these moments of tension where they're apart, it does feel a bit more tense there because, hey, now something really bad could happen. There's this almost sense of, how am I going to phrase this? They're more vulnerable when they're apart.
That is the way to look at it. I agree. And the film and those characters find ways to separate themselves in ways that don't make the characters dumb.
Yeah.
I really want to emphasize that. This isn't a movie where characters separate off because they're dumb, but rather their emotional states are so heightened that they're being irrational. And that's by design of the film. This isn't just them being lazy. This isn't The Trip we watched where our main character leaves a knife behind and it's like, why would you do that? Or another character didn't kill a guy when he really would have. And that's like contrivance.
They didn't leave a knife at the top of the rickety staircase that like just a single nudge would make it fall.
But I thought the Theo character, they had lines of dialogue that implied certain things. We know that she's a societal outcast. That's just what we garner. And again, it's that physicality. that you listening, you should watch this performance, just watch clips of this or watch this movie. That actress, the way she holds herself and the physical proximity she has towards Eleanor just communicates or gives us a lot to work with that isn't explicit, because this is the 60s, for instance, and there perhaps if we do want to read it as that she's possibly a lesbian, you may go, oh well, it's the time period, we can't actually say that out loud. But also perhaps unlike in the 1990s film where Catherine Zeta-Jones is a lesbian, like her character's like, I'm a lesbian, and that's my character trait, because this was 90s writing of gay people where their
and you said that she plays the Theo in that version, right? Yeah.
Which is not bad casting, but
that's good.
But where in the 1990s, early 2000s, gay characters were written as their identity is, I am gay. Here, the removal of that being a piece of knowledge that we have of the character adds to the mystique of the film, because we don't know anything about Theo. If anything, she's the one you walk away with going, I know the least about. And what her intentions are. There's a very cutting moment where she says, what was it about how I don't think he killed your mother, and just the reaction from Nell about that. And I want to get your take. I didn't think this myself, but it's possibility that a lot of viewers of this believe that because Theo knows so many things that she may not have the ability to know, that there could be a possible psychic ability of this character. How do you feel about that?
Oh, there was a line about how she has ESP, right?
Yeah.
I've kind of forgotten that part, to be honest. Because there was that scene earlier where the doctor mentioned like the reason for bringing in everyone. And I've kind of... Yeah, it all just kind of faded from my mind as I was watching the film. I completely forgot about it until just now.
But she keeps bringing things up that are clearly on the other character's mind. And it's like, how would you know that? How would she know about the mother? How would she know about that, Theo, to bring it up?
Right, so it wasn't mentioned beforehand.
I don't think so. I think that was the first time we, the audience, were clued in on the idea that this character could have killed her mother. Because we knew that she had a backstory with her mother, and we learned from that point on that her history was very similar to what happened in this Hill House before, where the old lady banging out for help and the carer just didn't come.
We knew that she was caring for her mother, though, right?
I believe we knew that as an audience, but I don't remember. But either way, that Theo character drew upon a fear and a sadness and a trauma that Nell had in the front of her mind when we were having that sequence.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't really thinking of it, because I remember that line. I guess I wasn't really thinking about it in the sense of, like, how would she know that? But because we had that earlier scene where, and I've already mentioned it, where she said something to make Eleanor feel angry, so that she wouldn't feel fear anymore. I was thinking of this character as like, okay, she's a character who has experience with, life experience that means that she can, I guess, make people feel certain ways, and that she would have, like, intentions behind the words she said. So I was more thinking of, like, oh, what was her intention in saying that?
I also think that she was a genuine antagonistic figure in the film for many portions of it. There's the ending where at least my interpretation of it is she realizes when they're saying goodbye to Eleanor. From my reading, the actress plays it where the character of Theo has realized, oh, I pushed this too far. I broke this woman. I fucked with her too much. Because that gave a character an arc. Because pretty much all the characters have an arc. They have a certain way they start out and a very specific way they end. That is almost a 180 of what they were. Like we said, we have Luke, where he doesn't believe in any of this, and this is all nonsense, and he doesn't actually have feelings towards it at all. to the very end, where now he has extreme feelings about this. He hates it. He's frightened by it. And same with the Doctor character, right? The Doctor character's all like, this is going to be a noble scientific pursuit, and I'm a logical man. And then by the end, he is a very highly strung emotional character who feels the burden and the guilt of everything and is no longer interested in determining about this being a supernatural thing or not. He just wants to get out of there, honestly. And then for me, you have Theo, where it's very much, she's devil may care. She's very much nonchalant and flippant, and she plays around with people's emotions because it's easy to do. To the end where she feels like she's pushed someone over the edge, and she feels guilt about it. Pretty much all these characters go through. And Eleanor, talking about characters, we could talk about Nell if you don't want to say anything more specific about Theo. Thea was my favorite character personally. Although we don't learn too much about her, just her actions spoke louder than any words could.
The fact that, again, I didn't know what she would, do, say, or how she will act next, definitely drew my eyes towards her. She felt like a character who, despite, having her experiences, despite clearly having some sort of intentions, there was a level of, like, deep down maybe she doesn't know quite what she wants and is kind of trying to see what works, and in the end she just chased too many rabbits, didn't catch one.
I agree. And we have our lead.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think of the performance first, before the character, the performance of Nell? What did you think of that actor's choices? Because she has to play extreme. That's her character. She has to play very extreme and unlikable. The character is many times a very abrasive and unlikable character. As actors, we know that can be a tightrope to walk.
Mm-hmm.
How did you fare with the performance? Did it work for you? Did it alienate you? Was it effective? Was it too much? How did you go?
The fact that we did get so much focus on Eleanor meant that the elements of her character that are unlikable were at least understandable. We got the sense that this character is very mentally damaged. The characters that we meet in her first scene, those are meant to be her siblings?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we get that she's kind of an outcast in her family.
Yeah, I think it's like her sister and the husband and brother-in-law.
We'll just generalize it to family.
Yeah.
Her close family clearly sees her as, mentally unstable, or untrustworthy. You've got the argument where it's like, get out of my room, I pay for this. Why, pay for this as well? I forget the exact dialogue, but you do get this.
Half of it's mine.
Half of it's mine. Even before we find out her intention, like the sister or sister-in-law, the other woman, keeps insisting, I am not lending you my car because how will I know that it will come back? So it's like, okay, is she distrustful or is she, got the right idea? And it was quickly learned when she takes the car, she kind of had the right idea, because Eleanor, while driving away, is narrating, they'll never see me again or something like that.
But we know that this is the first time Eleanor is breaking loose like this. She's lived even in this opening, when she takes that car, we understand that she's lived a very sheltered, restrictive life. So her doing this is breaking the mold. So it gets you to challenge the views of, well, is this the reaction of a woman who has been not trusted by family? Is this the actions taken by somebody where those people were right about her? You have to toss that up as we go along. And it really reminded me of Psycho in the opening. And this is obviously before Psycho came out. But in Psycho, we have our main character where she's a normal person. She's just a woman who's making it in this world, and she decides to do a bad thing. She decides to steal the money and drive off, and this is her breaking the mold, and we see how that will play out for her, how that will unravel her, and how bad things will happen to that character in Psycho. And it did remind me of that, where we have the pretty blonde-haired lady who's meek and normal, and they've now done a criminal thing, a bad thing. And not only that, but they're driving away and they're justifying it in their own head. And we know that they're a little off already. It really made me think about that a good portion of the time, where I was like, oh yeah, Psycho is a good... we just talked about that with Friday the 13th, where there was some influences of Psycho in that, specifically in the music.
And even, this is a character who obviously throughout the film has internal monologue, so narration, which at some points I felt like it was a bit too quiet, but at some other points it was very clear, so...
Oh, like literally sound-wise?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Like to actually hear, but
I didn't. We always have these, but I swear it's like you're listening to it on your laptop probably, or your computer.
Well, again,
I'm like on my TV, and I have no issue.
But even without adjusting the volume, like there were just some times where she was speaking a little too quietly, and I could just barely make out the words. Another time where it was super clear, even without changing. Maybe it was the copy I downloaded. I'm not
knows?
Sure. But I was going to say though, with the difference of that type of narration to that opening narration, which was very kind of like storytelling and like, you know, much louder and matching the visuals. That one was very clear and elicited like this kind of poetic quality, whereas the quieter one, where it felt kind of natural talking to yourself kind of thing, did give it a more unstable vibe. Which I thought that at least was very effective.
And the constant repetition of phrases, and when she talked, like she would talk in her head to the house, and you got very much a sense of the mental landscape of our character that we were privy to, that the other characters were not. And the characters learn along the way about how much she's unraveling. We already have a gathering of that from the very beginning, that she's unraveling. We already know that she's not okay. But the other characters don't really know that. They're thinking, oh, it'll be fine. But it's not going to be fine. It's not going to be fine at all. I thought that performance was tricky because, again, it is a tricky thing. You have to... especially actresses are judged even harder for having to play the shrieking mad. And I thought that she nailed it. I really like this performance. I like that it wasn't trying to be untruthful, because it would be an untruthful performance to try and make the character sympathetic at all times. Movies of this era, say a little bit earlier in the timeline of things, but we did the Caine Mutiny. Where in the Caine Mutiny, we had our main character who should have been unsympathetic at many points in the movie, but that performance and that overall mood and of the film wasn't allowing that. It was an untruthful portrayal of what that would be. Wouldn't you agree? We talked about that, where
it's been a while, but yeah, it's coming back to me.
Well, we just had that milquetoast plain normal guy, and he commits a mutiny and possibly turns a man who's already a little bit on the edge and pushes him over into insanity and gives him a mental breakdown. And the film treats it like, either way, he gets to go on the ship that he likes, as the captain he likes, and he's got his girl and his mum's nearby, and he's like happy-go-lucky, and that's one of those things, especially of this era, where the protagonists, even in your horror films like this, have to be sympathetic at all times, if not most. Here, it's rarely that. She's sympathetic in the fact that you stated it earlier. We understand her, but that doesn't mean we have to like her. And many viewers, still to this day, can struggle with that. And it is a thing where there's a lot of conversation of, we don't have to have a character who is likable or does good things to be a good character. Like, we can have characters who are unlikable and do bad things, and they are still a good character and a good performance. Here, that is what I got. I thought she was... I couldn't take my eyes off of her. They did such a marvelous job, again, production-wise. Her hair starts out relatively formal and tied back and a little bit, pinned up. And by the end of it, it's like, oh my God, I didn't realize how long it was. There was a moment where she's running around. I'm like, oh God, I didn't realize how long that hair was, because it's all undone now, just like her. It's just undone, and she's dancing. And a lot of stuff happening there.
Yeah, a lot of the empathy that I was feeling towards her were like in the moment, these horror things are happening and scaring her. And it was all about, like calming her down from this. It wasn't necessarily like, oh, I like her, she's a good person. Just empathy for the situation that they're in.
She meets an unfortunate ending. She's getting dragged off, and she's like, "No, I'll drive. It's my car." Again, that ownership of it.
Yeah.
But she's convinced now that she belongs to the house and that the house wants her. And she's driving off, and she's like swerving and driving, and she's talking out loud, like, "Why won't you let me do this? Let me drive," all of that.
Eleanor, come home.
And we get that the doctor's wife comes out, and then she swerves. And I want to get your overall reading and views on that ending, this tragic ending. How do you interpret it? What's your reading of this?
Are you talking about in terms of that it was a natural tragedy or supernatural?
Yeah.
Again, going back, since this brings back the doctor's wife, I think the fact that the doctor's wife is, making these location transitions that are pretty extreme, I do think that the supernatural forces somehow got her to the location where the car was driving to, because Eleanor does drive for quite a little bit to get all the way out there. So, character just walking or even running, without direction, I feel like, she would have been herded by this, whatever the supernatural is.
Now, just to go on that point, though, of the crash itself, do you believe the wife's take on what happened, which was she was already swerving into it? Like, by the time I showed up, like, it was a last-second thing, but I didn't make that difference. What do you think? Because to me, it was so chaotic visually in that moment, I can believe that. But also, I can believe the other. What do you think?
In my head, what I seem to remember from the perspective shot of the car, I remember the wife very clearly being on the right half of the frame for pretty much most of it.
And the car's turning to the left.
Yeah, but I seem to remember, and again, I could be completely wrong about this, I'm just basing it off my memory. She's in the frame, she's heading towards the middle of the frame, then she's heading away. If this is wrong, then I'm wrong, but if that's how I'm remembering it, then I do think that was a last-second reflex to get away from the wife and into the tree.
Yeah, I have to have a look at it again, but my view was that the wife was telling the truth there, in my recollection. And this is the magnificent thing about the filmmaking here, is it's such quick, rapid, and the movement is happening. You have only a fraction of time to comprehend the what's on screen, and this is competent filmmaking. This is one of those times where fast, quick editing and shaky movement and framing is very important, because in my impression in my brain, I already had the sensation that the car was already turning, and then there was this lady in the corner there, and you're like, "Whoa, what's that? Oh, is that her?" No, and then we're crashed. Very much like real life car crashes, right? Where there's just so many elements that are happening that it is hard to comprehend. It's very much like pinpointing what it actually is can be very difficult.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, like, the wife's arguing she was aiming for the tree anyway. I don't agree with that, but I don't think the wife's, to blame for it anyway, because I think, she was put there for a purpose against, her intentions.
And then we get Eleanor narrating at the end. That's her, right? That the house has her now, and
yes, that's right.
She's here, and that adds another element of, well, is this her ghost now speaking beyond the grave?
Were the ghosts like all the people that did die in that opening narration thing, since there were all these, common elements?
And we didn't talk about it, but this film gets an A+ from me. I recommend this because we had some creepy housekeepers. They were only there a little bit, but I loved them, and they were perfectly acted. They were not cartoonish stereotypes of what you imagine them to be, but also they were exactly what you imagine them to be.
They were the right level of unsettling.
The wife, particularly, was haunting in her performance. I know the haunting. She had certain line deliveries and smiles and just pauses that made me uneasy every time she was dispensing information. While the husband, he was just very much like over it. He just wanted to get out of there, and he was just rushing through the information.
I'm trying to warn you. Okay.
Fine, don't listen to me then. Yeah, and like Eleanor almost runs him over immediately, which was also a great touch. I recommend The Haunting. I recommended it, and I do recommend it. I think it is a very engaging film. It will leave a mark after you watch it. It is great for discussing and looking stuff up about it. And if you are a fan of these films where it plays around with what's real and what's not, and in a gothic horror type setting, then this is the quintessential one. This and The Innocents would be a great double feature movie night. They would be both excellent films to watch back to back. But that is me. What about you? Do you recommend this?
Yeah, go for it. This one is very meticulously crafted. Everything feels like it has a purpose.
Yeah, I've recommended 2 movies that you've been like, these were interesting, like Stoker and this, where you're like, I might have to rewatch this, and talking about it, you're like uneasy, but also like they're good movies. They
are. I mean, I have to recognize my biases. Yeah,
their bias is happening. So we have a movie recommendation from listening people out there, and I was tossing and turning. Do we have another spooky movie? I guess for us in Australia, our episode would come out after...
I'm pretty sure the next episode will be coming out in November, so...
November 1st.
Yeah.
Here in Australia. But elsewhere, it would be October 31st.
Okay. I was thinking this was the last one, but we can go one more.
Tossing and turning. So I asked one of our friends for a movie recommendation, and I told them this. I said, we're at this precipice where it's like it could be spooky month, could be a normal movie, and our friend Reese recommends a film.
I know that one.
And hopefully he can join us next episode. It is the Robert Zemeckis film, What Lies Beneath, starring Michelle Pfeiffer and Harrison Ford. So that will be the movie of discussion. Reese confused me because he wrote it with a question mark underneath. And I was like, is that the title of the movie? Or because he asked me like, any criteria? And I said, this. And he said, What Lies Beneath? And I was like, is this a further question, or is the movie a questioning title? No,
what lies beneath your intentions, right?
But he was saying it like, is this a good pick? But in text, that doesn't work. Like, and when I'm saying it like, hey Bartek, next week one of our listening people is going to recommend a film. What Lies Beneath? Like, and you're like, was that? Yeah, sure, that sounds good. But when it's just like in written form, I'm sitting there going, what am I looking at? Like, is this one of those ones where it's like, whatever happened to Baby Jane, where it's a question in the title? But it's like if The Haunting was called The Haunting.
The Haunting? Well, I mean, that would have been appropriate.
Yeah. If this was one with an ellipses afterwards, that also would work.
Ellipses question mark.
Yeah. It's one of those ones where the movie should have ended with the end question mark, and then a ghost, and then a Casper the Ghost sound going, woo!
And then it cuts to next time on The Haunting.
So in the movie remake on 1999 of The Haunting, Russ Tamblin's character was played by Owen Wilson. Catherine Zeta-Jones' character is also the Theodore character, and Liam Neeson is the Doctor.
Okay.
And instead, he's doing he's saying he's doing like not a research on paranormal, but a research on fear. I'm here to see your fear responses in this haunted house, and there's like CG Casper the Ghost type.
Okay, so he's the Crane.
Yeah, and the other actress is Lily Taylor, who plays the Nell character. And Mr. Dudley is played by Bruce Dern, father of Laura Dern. And he was in The Hateful Eight, which you haven't seen, but he's in that. And he's in a ton of things. He's in Logan's Run. He's always that crotchety old man who's very angry. But
Mr. Dudley was the guy that opened the gate, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mr. and Mrs. Dudley, the caretakers, groundskeepers, and all of that. But yeah, that is just fun facts about There's a lot of David Lynch actors actually in this I'm looking at now. There's like Virginia Madsen, who we all remember from the film David Lynch's Dune, where she narrates the movie. Oh, you've never seen David Lynch's Dune?
No.
This is now a side topic. Everyone, you can find us on the social medias, Facebook, Twitter, Spit and Polish Presents. You can email us at spitandpolished@gmail.com and rate and review us. But in David Lynch's Dune, it opens up with like a narration where you have space and then Virginia Madsen's the princess and her head fades on to the screen and it's just her, a talking head basically, and she's giving you like the big exposition dump of like this is Arrakis and this is this person and this empire, and it goes on for like 5 minutes. It's a very long monologue, and then she gives us it all and she fades away. Beautiful music plays. And you're like, okay, we're going to start the movie. And then she fades back up again. And then she's like, oh, I forgot to tell you something. She's like, she forgot. And then she's like giving us new information whilst also repeating the old information in case we forgot.
This feels like David Lynch.
And I'm like, this is the funniest way. To me, that feels like David Lynch being given studio notes. Being like, you got to have an explanation at the start about what this movie's about. Like,
all right,
okay.
I'll paste one in.
All right, I'll paste it in from the book. And then I'll just do it again. Because the audience is stupid, I guess. That's very amusing.
Thanks for giving me time to dream.
Dream! Did you dream last night at all? I don't remember my dreams, but did you have a dream recently that you remembered?
Not in the last few nights.
Wow.
I'm afraid.
Dreamless nights for Bartek. Wow.
No, I think there might have been dreams. I don't remember all of them.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. If I have a dream, I'll make sure to tell it on the podcast. But until then, listening people,
don't hold your breath.
I was going to say dream on, but then I actually got embarrassed. I was like, I can't say that. That's embarrassing. But if I say it like I was going to say this and then I didn't, it's less embarrassing.
All right, a good episode, Ryan. So let me just give you some notes about how you went this episode.
Okay.
At the end, I think you should say "dream on."
Okay. Dream on!